I have been enjoying an amazing book called Detroit Engine of America. It's by R.J. King. He's the editor of D Business Magazine here in the Detroit area. He's a journalist. He's now an author, has been an author, but now has written this book, Detroit Engine of America. And I've really been enjoying it. Now, the reason I'm featuring the book is that for those of you who are in or near or around the Detroit region, you certainly know the significance, most of you do anyway, of Detroit, not only to the local region, but to our country's history. But for those who may be listening to Startup Nation Radio from far away, whether it be a state or two away or a country or two away, across the oceans even, we want to make sure that we highlight this great story. Typically, we highlight great stories of businesses, but the entrepreneurial grit and determination that went into the building of Detroit is really an amazing story in and of itself and highly relevant to business here in America. R.J. titled his book, The Engine of America. Of course, Detroit's the home of the auto industry and all of the various medium-sized and small businesses that feed that industry that built the local economy here in and around Detroit. But, America would not be what we know as America today without the auto industry. And, of course, it was forged and established here in the Detroit region by great entrepreneurs, Henry Ford certainly among those, but others as well, again, ranging from small companies to the large, big auto brands that we know so well. So RJ's written this book to kind of retell the story of Detroit from the time it started out as a very, very important outpost, a fort, as the country was being developed. We're going to have RJ tell us about some aspects of the book, but he mentions that this is the story of how Detroit evolved in just 200 years from a crude stockade to a boomtown in 1900 that would propel the world on wheels, vastly expand the middle class, build up the arsenal of democracy, and serve as the birthplace of countless advancements, breakthroughs, and inventions. So true. I mean, not overstated at all. So true, so poignant, and so appropriate. So is the story of Detroit. In the prologue to the book, RJ very poetically says, I've often wondered what Antoine Lemay de la Mothe Cadillac would think of Detroit, of course, the founder of Detroit, would think of Detroit were he here today. He would marvel at our manufacturing industry, the serene promenade along the river's edge, the skyscrapers, the neighborhoods, the cultural scene, modern transportation, and so much more. Cadillac was an ambitious man. His only reference point is the fort he helped build in the summer of 1701, where today sits the 150 West Jefferson building, of course, an office building here in Detroit. He wasn't here for long, being appointed governor of Louisiana in 1710. In between, he spent 2 years in Quebec fighting to save Detroit from merchants eager to elbow their way into the fur industry. He would naturally wonder if Detroit was still ruled by the French monarchy, as Detroit was back then. After hearing the city passed from France, Britain, the United States, Britain, War of 1812, and back to America in 1815, he might inquire where the Native Americans lived that were displaced in this region. Yes, they were here when he and around 100 men arrived on July 24th, 1701, building Fort Pontchartrain, Detroit, along the river's edge near an expansive meadow. The Native Americans left the settlement alone for the most part and helped the inhabitants sustain themselves through the first winters. They were friends. They were friends to Cadillac and his other team members who helped build that fort and live here in the early going. From there, the wave of explorers traversing land and water to reach Detroit gained steam and exploded once the Erie Canal opened in 1825. Now, the story goes on and on and on. It's a fascinating story, starting with Cadillac and the building of Fort Pontchartrain here in Detroit, what is now Detroit. And it retells the story through as the manufacturing industry grew and then as related industries sprouted to support that industry. And again, the entrepreneurial essence is woven so tightly in this story that it's just so appropriate that the story's told on Startup Nation Radio. We've got a little clip from RJ talking about his book in his own words. Let's take a listen.
Well, thanks, Jeff. The book, Detroit, Engine of America, tells the story of how Detroit went from a French fort on the riverfront up to 1900, the birthplace of the automotive industry. There's a 200-year gap in our history that the book brought forward. And really through that whole time frame, you had really some great obstacles to the city's growth. Of course, the 1805 fire that burned down the whole fort. You had pandemics, riots, a civil war. out of that Civil War experience. We really accelerated our manufacturing might by building the munitions and wagons and guns and everything that was needed. But every time there's a crisis in Detroit, we always find a solution. And the city really rises from the ashes and forges these new business frontiers. And that's what Detroit's all about. It's just this might and brawn and muscle that we're able to put together. And everybody that comes here is just amazed by just the amount of people and the amount of things that they're doing and all the opportunities that are in front of everyone.
Thank you, R.J. The book, again, is Detroit, Engine of America, again, by R.J. King. And again, we're featuring this book because of its importance to the American economy, ultimately. In so many ways, from lifestyle, culture, society, so central to everything that made America what we know it to be today, and certainly so impactful in the Midwest region as the country began to grow west. Now, I'll point out just a couple more things to whet your appetite, and then you all will have to take it from there. You can get RJ's book and read it for yourself. It's a great read. I highly recommend it. RJ goes on to say, after the building of the fort, for anyone eager to explore the burgeoning nation or escape the regimented norms of the East Coast, Detroit was held in high esteem as a celebrated frontier town brimming with opportunity. Lots of natural resources in the Detroit region that were taken advantage of. And Detroit was one of the few cities, by the way, that's older than the country. In fact, the city was founded long before Chicago, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Indianapolis, or Pittsburgh, for example, other great Midwestern cities. RJ's first chapter, chapter 1, is called The 200-Year-Old Startup. There you go. And that's Detroit from 1600 to 1800. Detroit was indeed much like a startup. As I've mentioned, the first modern settlers of Detroit were French explorers in search of a passage to the Orient and precious metals, namely silver and gold. Portending the end of the Middle Ages, the early 1600s saw European shipbuilders develop larger, faster, and more responsive mercantile vessels. And to finance those endeavors, England, France, Spain, and the Netherlands, the superpowers of the day, bolstered their respective treasuries by financing trade routes to the New World. To chart the Great Lakes region, rivers and forests that would lead to the founding of Detroit in 1701, canoes were crafted from the surrounding birch trees and so on. So they used the natural resources to help discover and develop the area early on. And it created enough portages to the lands that separated the lakes, rivers, and streams. So people began to move inland from the waterways and to begin to develop the inland areas as well. At the time, the French lacked the expertise and equipment to tap large deposits of oil, natural gas, iron ore, copper, and nickel that would later fuel the Industrial Revolution. And so they really focused on the natural resources there, ultimately the lumber and certainly the animal pelts and furs that could be acquired from and traded as a natural resource in the area. Interestingly, they did the trading early on with the various Native American tribes that inhabited the Great Lakes region, the Huron, Iroquois, Miami, Ojibwa, Ottawa, Sauk, Wolf, Wyandot, and Potawatomi tribes, among others. They were really the customers of the early business that was going on, the early trading that was going on in the region. And of course, we know Detroit grew to become an industrial might in the entire world from those early days, trading the natural resources, the lumber, the furs, and so on. What a great story it is. Hopefully that whets your appetite a bit and wants you to pick that book up and read more. I certainly can't wait to finish it. I'm almost through it, and we'll go back and actually read it again and keep it as a reference indeed. So thank you, R.J. King. Congratulations on a great work. We really appreciate it. And for those of you listening, check it out. Great read indeed.